The HOA president thought she could bully my wife while I was deployed overseas. She fined us for everything: grass too long, car parked wrong, even our American flag. But she made one big mistake: she messed with a soldier's family. My base commander doesn't play games. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. Let me tell you about the most satisfying revenge story of my life. It involves a power-hungry HOA president, a deployment overseas, and a base commander who doesn't mess around when it comes to protecting his soldiers. My name is Jake Martinez and I'm a staff sergeant in the U.S. Army. 3 years ago, my wife Sarah and I bought our first house in Pine Valley Estates, a nice suburban neighborhood just outside Fort Campbell. It seemed perfect: good schools for when we wanted kids, friendly neighbors, and only a 20-minute drive to base. What we didn't know was that we'd moved into the kingdom of Karen Whitfield. Karen was the HOA president, and she ruled our little neighborhood like a dictator. She was in her mid-50s, always perfectly dressed, and had this way of looking at you like you'd personally offended her entire bloodline. Her house was the biggest on the block, a massive 2-story colonial with a perfectly manicured lawn that looked like it belonged in a magazine. For the first year, Sarah and I kept our heads down. We followed all the HOA rules, kept our grass exactly 2.5 inches tall, yes, Karen actually measured, and made sure our garbage cans were stored out of sight. We thought we were being good neighbors. But Karen had it out for military families from day one. The first incident happened when I came home from a training exercise. I was exhausted, dirty, and just wanted to see my wife. I parked my truck in our driveway, nothing unusual about that. The next morning there was a citation on my windshield. Military vehicles are not permitted to be visible from the street between the hours of 6 p.m. and 8 a.m., it read. Fine, $150. I stared at that paper, my blood pressure rising. My truck wasn't even a military vehicle. It was my personal Ford F-150 that just happened to have an Army decal on the back window. Sarah found me standing there, shaking my head. What's wrong, babe? I showed her the citation. Her face went red. She's got to be kidding. That's not even a real rule. But when we checked the HOA handbook, sure enough, buried on page 47 in tiny print, was a clause about military or commercial vehicles. It was so vague it could mean anything, but Karen had found a way to use it against us. That was just the beginning. Over the next year, the citations kept coming. Our American flag was too large for proper residential display, $100 fine. Our outdoor grill was visible from the street when we had friends over for a barbecue, $75 fine. Our garden gnome, a gift from Sarah's mother, was not in keeping with neighborhood aesthetics, $200 fine. Each time, Sarah would call Karen to explain or ask for leniency. Karen's response was always the same: rules are rules, dear. Perhaps if your husband chose a more stable career, you wouldn't have these issues. That last comment made my hands clench into fists. Sarah had to physically hold me back from marching over to Karen's house that day. The breaking point came when I got my deployment orders. 6 months in Afghanistan, leaving in 2 weeks. Sarah and I were stressed enough about the separation without adding HOA drama to the mix. The night before I left, we were sitting on our front porch just enjoying our last evening together. Sarah was crying quietly, trying to be strong for me. I held her hand and promised I'd be back before she knew it. I'm worried about dealing with Karen while you're gone, she whispered. Don't worry about her, I said. Just follow the rules, pay any fines, and I'll handle it when I get back. 6 months will fly by. I was so wrong. I'd been deployed for 3 weeks when Sarah called me, sobbing. It was 2 a.m. my time in Afghanistan, but I was wide awake in seconds. Jake, she's lost her mind, Sarah cried. She's fining us for everything. The grass was a 1/4 inch too long, $300. I left the garbage can out 15 minutes past pickup time, $200. Yesterday she said our mailbox was improperly positioned, $400. My jaw clenched. How much total? Over $2,000, Jake. I can't keep up with this while you're gone. I'm working double shifts at the hospital to save money for when you get back, and she's bleeding us dry. Something dark and cold settled in my chest. Going after me was one thing, but targeting my wife while I was overseas? That crossed a line. Sarah, document everything. Take pictures, save all the citations. And call Base Legal. They have resources for deployed soldiers' families. But Karen was just getting started. The next week, Sarah called again. This time she was angry instead of sad. She had our car towed. Sarah shouted into the phone. I was at the grocery store for 45 minutes, and when I came back, my car was gone. She said I was parked improperly in our own driveway because the bumper was 6 inches over the sidewalk. 6 inches? I could barely speak through my rage. It cost $300 to get it out of impound, Jake. She's doing this because you're not here to fight back. She told Mrs. Henderson from next door that she was going to clean up the neighborhood while the troublemakers were away. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Sarah working extra shifts, dealing with all this stress while I was thousands of miles away, unable to protect her. Every soldier's worst nightmare is something happening to their family while they're deployed, and Karen was making that nightmare a reality. I started making phone calls. First, I called Captain Morrison, my company commander back at Fort Campbell. He was a good man who looked out for his soldiers. "Sir, I have a situation," I began and explained everything. Captain Morrison listened without interrupting. When I finished, his voice was ice cold. "She's harassing a deployed soldier's family? Give me her contact information, Sergeant Martinez." Next, I called my buddy Rodriguez who worked in the base legal office. "Hey man, I need help. There's this HOA president targeting my wife while I'm deployed." "Oh hell no," Rodriguez said. "We've seen this before. Some of these HOA tyrants think they can push around military families because we can't fight back while deployed. Send me everything, every citation, every fine, every communication. We're going to bury this woman in legal paperwork." But my secret weapon was Colonel James Patterson, the base commander at Fort Campbell. Colonel Patterson was a legend. He'd served 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, and had zero tolerance for anyone who messed with his soldiers or their families. He was also Sarah's patient. She was a nurse at the base hospital, and he'd been coming in for physical therapy after a training injury. Sarah mentioned our HOA situation during one of his appointments, not realizing who she was talking to. She was just venting to a friendly patient about her stress. "Ma'am," Colonel Patterson had said quietly, "did you say your husband is deployed and this woman is harassing you?" When Sarah nodded, the colonel's expression changed. "What's this woman's name and address?" 3 days later, Karen got a visitor. Sarah called me, laughing for the first time in weeks. "Jake, you're not going to believe what happened." "Tell me," I said, grinning at the happiness in her voice. "So I'm in the kitchen making coffee this morning, and I see this official army vehicle pull up to Karen's house. This tall, intimidating man in full dress uniform gets out and walks to her door. Turns out it was Colonel Patterson. My jaw dropped. The base commander went to her house? "Oh, it gets better," Sarah giggled. Mrs. Henderson saw the whole thing. She said Karen answered the door in her bathrobe, all confident and snooty. But when she saw this colonel standing there, her face went white as a sheet. "What did he say?" Mrs. Henderson couldn't hear everything, but she heard him say, harassment of military families and legal consequences and federal protections. Karen kept trying to interrupt, but he just kept talking in this calm, terrifying voice. I was grinning so hard my face hurt. How long was he there? 20 minutes. And when he left, Karen just stood in her doorway, staring after his car like she'd seen a ghost. But Colonel Patterson wasn't done. That afternoon, Karen received a certified letter from Base Legal. Rodriguez had been busy. The letter outlined every federal law protecting military families from harassment, referenced the Service Members Civil Relief Act, and threatened legal action if the harassment continued. It also demanded that all fines issued during my deployment be reversed, with a detailed legal explanation of why each citation violated federal protections for deployed service members' families. The letter was signed by 3 base lawyers and countersigned by Colonel Patterson himself. Karen's response was to call an emergency HOA meeting. Sarah went, armed with copies of every citation, every payment receipt, and the base legal letter. She said Karen looked like she hadn't slept in days. "This is ridiculous," Karen announced to the dozen residents who showed up. "I'm being threatened by the military for simply enforcing our community standards." Mr. Johnson, our neighbor from across the street, raised his hand. He was a Vietnam veteran and had always been friendly to us. "Karen, I've lived here for 15 years and I've never seen you issue this many citations to one family, especially while the husband is deployed overseas. The rules apply to everyone equally." Karen snapped. "Really?" Mrs. Chin from Pine Street stood up. "Because my son parked his motorcycle in his driveway last month, that's also a motor vehicle visible from the street, and I never got a citation." Other neighbors started speaking up. Turns out, everyone had noticed Karen's campaign against us, and most people were disgusted by it. The meeting ended with a vote of no confidence in Karen's leadership. She was furious, but legally there wasn't much she could do. But Karen still had one more card to play. 2 days later she filed a complaint with the city, claiming that our house was negatively impacting neighborhood property values, and demanding an official inspection. Big mistake. The city inspector who showed up was Tom Bradley, a former Army sergeant who'd served 2 tours in Iraq. When he realized he was being used as a weapon against a deployed soldier's family, he was not happy. His inspection report was thorough and professional. Our house passed with flying colors. But Tom also noted frivolous complaint and potential harassment of military family in his official report. That report triggered an investigation by the city's housing department into Karen's pattern of complaints. They discovered she'd filed over 60 complaints in the past year, 40 of them against military families in the neighborhood. The city sent Karen a warning letter about filing frivolous complaints, with a threat of fines if it continued. Meanwhile, I was getting updates from my buddies back at base. Word had gotten around about Colonel Patterson's visit to Karen, and it had become legendary. Apparently, he'd told her in no uncertain terms that if she continued harassing military families, she'd find herself dealing with federal authorities. The harassment stopped overnight. But the story gets even better. 3 weeks later, Karma paid Karen a visit in the form of her own HOA rules. Mrs. Henderson called Sarah, practically cackling with glee. "You need to see this," she said. Sarah walked over to find a citation on Karen's own front door. Apparently, her precious lawn had developed brown patches, probably from stress, and someone had reported her for failure to maintain acceptable landscaping standards. The citation was signed by the HOA's vice president, who had apparently grown tired of Karen's tyrannical behavior. Over the next month, Karen received citations for her garbage can being visible from the street, her newspaper staying in the driveway past 9 a.m., and her car being parked improperly in her own driveway. The vice president was using Karen's own ridiculous interpretations of the HOA rules against her. Sarah said watching Karen march around the neighborhood, red-faced and indignant, demanding to know who was filing complaints against her, was the most entertaining thing she'd seen in months. But the absolute best part came when I finally returned from deployment. I'd been home for 2 days when I saw Karen outside, struggling with a broken sprinkler head on her perfect lawn. The old Jake might have offered to help. I'm a decent guy and I was raised to help neighbors in need. But this wasn't the old Jake. This was the Jake whose wife had been harassed for 6 months while he was overseas, unable to protect her. I walked right past Karen like she didn't exist. "Excuse me," she called out. "Sergeant Martinez." I stopped and turned around slowly. "Yes." For a moment she looked uncertain. This was the first time we'd been face to face since my deployment, and I think she realized I knew exactly what she'd put Sarah through. I wanted to welcome you home," she said weakly. I stared at her for a long moment. "Mrs. Whitfield, let me be very clear about something. You targeted my wife while I was deployed overseas serving my country. You tried to financially ruin us with frivolous fines. You had her car towed. You made her cry herself to sleep more nights than I can count." Her face was getting redder with each word. "Now that I'm back, if you so much as look at my wife wrong, if you file one more bogus citation against my family, if you even think about harassing us again, you'll be hearing from base legal, city housing, and possibly federal authorities. Do we understand each other?" Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Finally she nodded. "Good," I said and walked away. That was 6 months ago. Karen stepped down as HOA president 2 weeks after I got home. The official reason was personal commitments, but everyone knew the truth. The new president reversed all the fines from my deployment and issued a formal apology to Sarah and me. Karen still lives in the neighborhood, but she keeps to herself now. Her perfect lawn has never quite recovered from whatever stress killed those patches, and she's received more HOA citations in the past 6 months than we ever did. Sometimes I see her peeking through her curtains when I'm outside working in the yard or washing my truck. She never waves. I never acknowledge her. Sarah and I are happier than ever. We've made friends with most of our neighbors, who turned out to be good people once they weren't afraid of Karen's retaliation. Mr. Johnson helps me with home projects. Mrs. Chin brings us vegetables from her garden. Mrs. Henderson keeps us updated on all the neighborhood gossip. And Colonel Patterson? He still comes to Sarah for physical therapy. Last week he asked about our HOA situation. "All quiet on the Western Front, sir?" I told him. He smiled. "Outstanding, Sergeant. That's how it should be. The best part is knowing that if I ever deploy again, I don't have to worry about Sarah being harassed. The whole base knows about Karen now, and there are about 5,000 soldiers who would be happy to pay her a visit if she started her nonsense again. Looking back, I'm almost grateful for the whole experience. It showed me what an amazing woman I married. Sarah handled months of harassment with grace and strength that amazed me. It showed me that my military family has my back, even when I'm halfway around the world. And it taught me that bullies like Karen only have power when good people stay silent. These days our neighborhood is peaceful. The HOA functions the way it's supposed to, handling legitimate issues and maintaining property values without terrorizing residents. Kids play in the streets. Neighbors actually talk to each other. And Karen? Well, let's just say she learned an important lesson about picking fights with people who serve their country. Sometimes, when I'm sitting on my front porch with Sarah, watching the sunset and listening to the kids playing down the street, I think about that night before my deployment when Sarah was worried about dealing with Karen alone. Don't worry, I told her. I'll handle it when I get back. I kept that promise, but I had a lot of help from some very good people who believe that military families deserve better than harassment from power-hungry HOA tyrants. And that's a story worth telling.